The House has voted overwhelmingly to grant the president the support and the authorization that he desires to aid and assist and finance some of the moderate Syrian rebel groups to fight against ISIS in Syria. We've got the numbers for you in terms of that. Despite vocal opposition from both war-weary liberals and defense hawks who feel the Syria plan should include more robust steps, majorities in both conferences voted 273 to 156 to back Obama's plan to give military aid to vetted members of the Free Syrian Army. The yes vote was made up of 159 Republicans and 114 Democrats. Opposition was just as bipartisan, with 85 Democrats and 71 Republicans voting no. And so there, obviously, you have an interesting alliance of people who believe that we should not be getting involved in this conflict. We shouldn't be aiding these groups that we don't know nearly enough about, combining with those who feel like we should have done far more and have sent more people in.
Yeah, listen, these votes in Congress 7 weeks ahead of an election.
You think that might be influencing?
It might have just a tad bit to do with it, and that's why you saw some people on one end of the spectrum voting with people that they never ever otherwise will vote with, ideologically different. Some people just to oppose the president. Some people because they just don't like spending money on anything, unless it's George W. Bush's war, and then just spend whatever you can.
Totally different type of war.
Yeah, it's a totally different type of war. We had an authorized use of military force. This becomes a little muddied because in the House, it was part of a continuing resolution. So it's, okay, should we do what the president's asking us to do in Syria? Oh, and also, should we fund the government? And so it becomes a little bit muddy there. But there are people who are saying that, they're the typical, like Mike McCall, Texas Republicans, they're people when it comes to the military that are going to support the president. Not no matter what, but that's their knee jerk is to support the president. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Senate. We expect results from the Senate shortly, but presumably it's going to get support there.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because early on a few weeks ago when the president made clear he was going to do something, he laid out his plan. They both wanted the authorization of the House and the Senate and said simultaneously that they don't require it. Right. And the previously passed legislation gives them the authority that they need. And so it sets up an interesting situation for people when considering whether or not to support the bill, because obviously, as you said, they're thinking ahead to the election. They know that the American public is scared about ISIS. I would say too scared about ISIS, with far too many saying that the media is downplaying the threat, but they're very scared. So they can vote to support it without really the fear that if it goes badly, I think that it'll come back to bite them in the ass too much because people already associate it with Obama and him taking unilateral authority. And so I think that the calculus that they are making is a little bit different than in past military situations.
And to the same end, the Democrats can vote against it for precisely the same reason, out of protecting,
to distance
themselves both from, they can vote against it to distance themselves from the president and also protect the president, which is the other side of it. It's like, we don't think this is going to work politically, so we're going to oppose it. That's really getting a little wonky into it. Rand Paul gave a speech today. If you thought this was confusing, Rand Paul's speech was one of the most confusing and good speeches I've ever heard on the Senate. I shouldn't say I've ever heard. One of the good speeches I've heard recently on the Senate floor. I'm going to pull back on the hyperbole, but it was a very good Senate floor speech, a stem winder, as they say in the Senate. And what he did was he came out, basically, it's almost like he went under his dad's bed, pushed aside the racist newsletters and found a great speech, brought it to the Senate floor, gave the speech. He said basically he's going to support the president for airstrikes, but he's not going to support the arming the Syrian military. Well, you're either supporting him or you're not supporting him. There are not two votes. He's up there saying there should be two votes. We should be voting on each of these things.
I think that's a perfectly fair point.
Yeah, it's a perfectly fair point to make, but it's also not what's happening.
Exactly. By design.
So everything he does is political. So what's going to happen here? Let's say we go into Syria, we arm the Syrian rebels, we also carpet bomb them from the sky. Let's say it goes well, right? Well, Rand Paul was there to say I was supporting it all the way. Let's say it goes abysmally. I told you we should have voted on this separately. It is the perfect recipe for 2016 because he can get out there and he can say, well, I voted against doing that. I said it. Here's me speaking in the Senate saying we shouldn't arm the rebels. And the voter in Iowa doesn't really know the difference. Joe voter, like Joe Hockey, doesn't really know the difference between those two things. It's nuanced to that voter, taking nothing away from them and taking nothing away from Iowa anywhere. I mean, a layperson can have that spun anyway. It was an exceptional speech because of that, because of how it sets him up for 2016.
Yeah. Now, I do wonder, though, I remember back to a couple of the speeches he's given that we here have given him a bunch of credit for. So I remember after a couple of the incidences, I believe, in Yemen in terms of our drone bombings, he gave a great speech about the drones, and we gave him a ton of credit for the Stand with Rand and all that. And then it wasn't more than a few weeks or a month later that he gave a speech saying basically the exact opposite. We need to continue these. And so hopefully we can savor the speech he's given today before in a few weeks maybe he gives the exact opposite.
Well, I mean,
which is entirely possible.
But this served two purposes. He's also not going to be the nominee, so it doesn't matter. But this serves him well for 2016 because it was totally ambiguous, but it seemed steadfast.
Yeah, and I love the point that you made about the fact that this is wrapped up with that continuing resolution, which I've seen that is over $1 trillion.
Yeah.
And so right now, I think the number that they're saying in terms of the funding they're going to provide is something like $550 million, which seems like there's no way that's what it's going to be limited to. And so when you put it in that context, it seems like not a lot of money,
right?
I would imagine. Although, and we're already seeing every day, we're seeing indications that this is not going to be nearly as limited as they sold it, similar to the situation with the second war in Iraq. That I saw, they were saying the military advisors that are currently operating in Iraq might soon have to take up frontline positions against ISIS. So they're advisors, they're not soldiers, they're not boots on the ground, and they're not going to be fighting ISIS, except that they're going to be in frontline positions, probably with guns in their hands, I would imagine.
Right.
And so Obama comes out every day and says, we're not going to be fighting on the ground with ISIS. And then the generals come out that same day and keep reiterating, we're going to, we might need to more in the future. And so it's possible that some people are going to end up regretting their votes that they just cast, or that in the Senate they're about to cast later on today. Unfortunately, despite the fact that we have all of these great like fact verification websites, most people don't pay attention to those.
No, they don't.
Sort of disappointing.
PolitiFact. Good service, not, it's not, it doesn't change public opinion, but that's, they knew that's, it's entertaining, and it's important to have these fact-checking sites, and more people will go to them. More people go to them now than did before, so that's good.
Yeah, and so as we said, final point here, the vote has not, as of when we're filming this, the vote has not yet happened in the Senate. All indications are that it will pass, as it has in the House. The president will get the authorization he is looking for. He'll get the funds he's looking for. It's going to be interesting to see what he does with it and what happens as a result of it.